5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
It's 7 p.m. in London, 2 p.m. in Philadelphia, and around the world, but mostly in some living rooms and kitchens in bits of the UK. It's time for TTFM.
Well, the TTF are having a ball. Instead of meeting up in a big hall, we're trying hard to keep the virus in place. At the moment we can't meet face to face. Andy Graham to the left of me, Paul Hutton to the right. Here I am, stuck in the traffic with you. Yes, sir, stuck in the traffic with you. And I'm wondering what it is I should do. I'm so scared in case my clients are here. And I'm thinking I should have bottle beer. Derek Cates to the left of me, Phil Blythe to the right. Here I am, stuck in the traffic with you. Well, we started out with a red and we're glad that they have done so much. But the client comes and calling, slaps you on the back and says, please, it's about your fees. I think it's good that we have got two DJs with lots of knowledge of the UK highways. I'm trying hard to find a workable rhyme, but it's late and I have run out of time. Andy Ferguson to the left of me, Graham Hanson to the right. Here I am, stuck in the traffic with you. Well, we all work here in traffic and we try to do the best that we can. And our clients come and knock and slap us on the back and say, please, please charge more fees. Well, I don't know why I came here tonight. I got the feeling that something ain't right. I'm so scared in case I fall off the chair. And I'm wondering how I'll get down the stairs. Clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right. Here I am, stuck in the traffic with you. Stuck in the traffic with you. Stuck in the traffic with you. Here I am, stuck in
So
the
we should all be in a room somewhere with warm white wine, chatting to each other about anything but traffic. But sadly, this year, as we know, things are very different. So this is the Transport Technology Forum's social event for 2021. It is what we're calling TTFM. Good evening to you. This is Paul Hutton, joined by Andy Graham of White Willow Consulting. And what we should normally do at this point, Andy, in my book of how to be a DJ, is back announce who sang that particular song, Stuck in the Traffic. But it was done by an anonymous member of the Intelligent Transport Systems community, and I have absolutely no idea who it was, and you won't tell me.
No, absolutely, Paul. I'm afraid I won't, because that was done by someone who calls themselves the Tim Tom Funky Chorus, and he sent us that as part of our Transport Technologies Got Talent initiative. And through this evening, we'll be paying you lots of people who you may know, and lots of people who will be recognisable, who've sent in bits of their musical talent.
It should be an absolute belter. Other things to look forward to in the next hour on TTFM this evening. We will have a look back on what we had at the Transport Technology Forum conference today. We will have, as Andy said, Transport's Got Talent. We'll play a game called Punchlines to Bad Jokes. We'll find out a transport story from our voiceover man and play you probably the easiest radio competition in the whole world when we play you the mystery singer. And we have our special guest star tonight, Michael Rodd. He of transport technology journalism fame. He's done so much when it comes to technology in his days on Tomorrow's World, and we'll find out more from what he remembers of his time on Tomorrow's World when he did various exciting transport technology gizmos at the time. That some of them happened, some of them haven't, some of them are happening at the moment. We'll talk more to Michael in a moment. Let me first of all introduce voiceover man. Good evening, voiceover man.
Good evening, Paul. Good to be with you tonight.
And so usually voiceover man is just a load of buttons that you press on the screen, but tonight we have him live. He has the greatest voice in the world, and it's kind of...
Well, I wouldn't go that far. How can we test that this is live? Ask me a question that I wouldn't have known up until now. Let's try and prove this is live somehow.
What was the first song that was played on this evening's exciting program?
It was that wonderful version of Stuck in the Traffic with You, which mentioned virtually everybody on this call apart from myself and Michael Rodd.
Oh, well, there you go then, you see. And so
must be live.
So we are absolutely live. So let's bring in Darren Capes, the manager of the Transport Technology Forum, because we'll do the housekeeping-y bit at the beginning of the evening. Because again, this is generally what happens at a social event: is you stand there and you say, "What do you think of today?" Then, and you talk 3 or 4 things about what you thought of today, and then you go on and start talking about everything and anything, and that's what we're going to in a moment. So, good evening, Darren Capes. Welcome to TTFM.
Thank you. Good evening. So I get to do the boring bit then before everybody gets drunk and starts getting exciting.
You took the words right out of my mouth, mate. So what did you and Andy make of today? What were the highlights for you?
Well, considering it was all done online, it actually worked quite well. Nothing went horrendously wrong. No one died. Nothing caught fire, which I think is a victory in anyone's book. And all the talk seemed to go off fairly well, and the PowerPoint played when it should. So I chalked that down as a victory, and I think we did some good stuff as well. We've launched our procurement guidance, which I think will be big news for people trying to buy technology in the future. I certainly hope so. We had a very, very stimulating session with kind of a bit like mixing oil and water, mixing people from the infrastructure side and the automotive side together in the same session. And we came to a violent agreement that we need to speak to each other more, which is great. That's really promising for the coming year, that we actually do that. Because when I started designing roads in the 1980s, the only thing you needed to know about automotive, the only interface between the two was 4 little patches of rubber. Beyond that, you didn't really need to know anything about what cars were to design roads. And hopefully now that's finally changing. So yeah, it's been a good day. We've had some good talks, some good stuff about what's happening in Europe, and yeah, very good.
And Andy, what tickled your fancy today?
Well, apart from Steve Gooding's dial tone, which I thought was very entertaining, I think the fact that we're still active in Europe despite Brexit, I think the idea of, as Darren says, about the breaking down the fence between automotive and ourselves is a really good overture to join together. I like the stuff from Elkrig about breaking down the fence inside local authorities. And I think also the fact that we've got the chance to be in a city moonshot project. We could be in the same place as Toronto and Buenos Aires. So I think a really good mix. Great start to the conference, and looking forward to tomorrow.
And we'll look forward to tomorrow a bit later on. Sorry, Darren, what were you going to say?
Well, just a final observation. You know, after a year of Zoom calls and Teams calls, I expect my daily fill of rooms full of Billy bookcases and guitars on walls. I've not seen any today. So this is one metric we need to improve on tomorrow. We need to see more rooms with Billy bookcases and guitars on walls.
Well, it was very much worked on when we looked at this tonight to say that we would have no screens, which is why we are streaming it live on MediaPartnerHighwaysNews.com, streaming TTFM this evening. Just a reminder, on the website, you'll see, if you look carefully, there's a small speech bubble. If you click on that, that's where you can put your comments in. and put any of your thoughts, any of your questions, anything else. It's a little box in there. At the moment, the comments on the site are testing 1 2 3, hello testing, good evening, we'll be live from 7 p.m. and Poptabulous mate. So we've not really set the bar very high when it comes to comments. So it doesn't matter if you've had a couple of G&Ts, I'm sure you can raise the intellectual level of the comments. It's a little speech bubble on the Highways News website. So let's move on to our special guest this evening, and let's just have a blast from the past. If you're over probably about the age of 48 or so, this funky bit of jazz was a Thursday night staple.
One day out. It's now Wednesday, but it should really be Thursday, just gone 7 o'clock. And now TTFM presents our special guest, Michael Rodd.
Good evening, Michael Rodd, legend of transport technology, and our special guest this evening.
Paul, you've got to stop. Yes, I am just bowled over with what's happened in the first 8-9 minutes of the program. It's fantastic. I mean, what you have hooked up here, if the world could work like this, it would be a happier place. Well done, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be with you. There's nothing like live broadcasting. And of course, that tune that we've just heard, anybody remember who wrote it? It's not like Screen Test. It's not a quiz. It was written by John Dankworth. He and his wife,
Claire.
Well done, yes.
Yeah.
Bonus point there. Wrote it because they were fans of the program, and it was something that put the nerves up all of us on the team whenever you heard it start.
Because it was all live, wasn't it? So, there was no surely now you would just pre-record it, you'd edit it together, and you'd just play out the 30 minutes. Why on earth did you have to do it live?
Well, it's a good question. I think the real reason probably is it was cheaper, and the BBC had a lot of studios in those days, which they don't have anymore, and they had to fill them with things. But there was another slightly more subtle background in that many of the things that we demonstrated were, said he modestly, pretty amazing back in the very early 70s. And I think if people suspected that it was done, recorded, and could be edited and fudged, they wouldn't be quite so impressed as they were with one or two of the things that we did manage to make work in real time, in the studio, before your very eyes.
And then, of course, you also had the films that you used to play. And I want to jog your memory, because I think this must be almost exactly 50 years ago.
Lost, driving in a strange town with an address but no map.
200 yards, straight on at traffic lights.
Now that's what I call a really good navigator, a clear, precise instruction, given in plenty of time for me to position myself in the road so that I can negotiate the hazard or the change of direction with the utmost convenience. Yet here I am, completely alone in the car, and at the same time in the very best of hands. My navigator is this pre-recorded cassette of tape. On it are all the instructions I need to find my way around this route, and if I ever use a different route, I simply use a different cassette.
Fantastic. Driving round Chatham, I think you were, in a Morris Minor.
Come. A VW Beetle.
Oh, was it a Beetle? Oh, right. See, black and white on YouTube. I couldn't really tell. So what do you remember of that?
Plenty. Where did you find that?
It's on YouTube. Everything's on YouTube. So yeah, it was just randomly. But the next thing after I was ripping the Tomorrow's World theme tune was that, and I was like, "There's a nav system from 50 years ago. This is fantastic for our program."
Well, there's nothing sacred. No, I'm pulling your leg. I do have a copy of that, and I showed it to a few of my friends in our retirement club, and the VW, the Beetle, produced a kind of what one can only describe as orgasmic reaction from one or two people who, of course, remembered the days when they had a VW Beetle. And it was a pretty cherished car. I don't know whether anybody listening tonight is a Beetle fan, but it was a real pleasure to drive, dead easy, and greatly impressed my nephew, who had a family VW, which for some reason or another, he had to learn to drive on, and he said it was an absolute beast. So sometime between the 70s and the noughties of this century, the VW obviously went into a decline.
Now we'll share the actual YouTube video later on, but remind us or tell us what the sort of thinking was behind the navigation system, because of course there was no sat nav, there was no satellite part of it, so it must have struggled to work out where it was.
It was a bit of a miracle. Here was a little car with a tape player capable of handling cassettes, and if you fed the right cassette into it and switched it on, it talked to you at each point in the journey you were taking with the next instruction. Now, 1971, as you say, 50 years ago, no one had ever come across anything quite like this. We're probably quite used to our navigator sitting in the passenger seat, shouting instructions and trying to read a map and complaining. But here was something crystal clear: 500 yards, turn right before the zebra crossing. And it was unbelievable. The fun and games started when the little team that put the program together started to play with it and realized, of course, that you had to have a different tape for each route. How did it know when to play the appropriate instruction? Well, the genius who had produced it had created an electronic circuit which monitored how many times the wheel in the car went round before you reached the next road junction. He then devised an audio system that imparted a bleep on the cassette tape that instructed the little controlling circuit how many wheel turns there had to be before the next instruction was issued. So, tootling along, this little machine, without being obvious, of course, to the driver, was going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, pom, pom, beep, time for an instruction. The really clever bit, I thought, was that the duration of the beep indicated the length of time before the next instruction was issued. Now, so far, so good. It was when we sat and thought about the challenge of having to produce a different tape for each route, and also perhaps sometimes having to start from the wrong place. So I'm afraid to say, without giving it a spoiler, the film actually did poke a bit of fun at this device, and it makes me feel very guilty. I only hope that the genius amateur electronic engineer with the VW Beetle back in 1971 who made this possible was still around when the sat-nav started, when that became possible, when the internet gave him all the access that he needed to the information to make this thing work without a problem.
Yeah, it's just unbelievable. I mean, just looking at it, and you talk in the film about the suggestion that it could be used by chauffeurs driving a specific route or training bus drivers and things. But of course, the problem is the moment you went off the route, because it was still counting the wheel turns, it would have got particularly lost. But you know, we'll gloss over that.
This is supposed to be a trailer for the movie.
Oh well, we've got voiceover man to do the trailer for a movie. So,
good man. Yes.
Sorry, carry on, Andy.
I was just thinking, for voiceover man, this would have been a lovely business for you, because you'd have had to record. Well, there's 23 million postcodes in the UK, so it'd be 23 million postcodes to 23 million postcodes. That would have kept you in business for years. It
would have taken years just to record the things to begin with. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, carry on, Andy.
Well, I was impressed because if you actually want to see the video, I think it's also available on the BBC archive, which has some most marvelous collection of Tomorrow's World stuff, including your old colleague Raymond Baxter introducing such things. But it finishes off with the most prescient view, which was you're explaining that navigation might go wrong and navigate someone to the edge of a harbour where there was a sign of the car going into the river. And that's happened in many, many occasions due to sat-nav. So again, Tomorrow's World was 30 years ahead of its time.
Well, as I said, the wonderful engineer in Chatham who produced it, I hope he was still around, because the idea we poked fun at back in 1971 wasn't such a crazy idea at all.
No.
So tell me, that was something that was way ahead of its time and never itself became commercially viable. Did any of the transport related features that you did on Tomorrow's World actually become, in the incarnation that you showed, something that the traveling public started to use?
Hard to say, because of course what we were demonstrating was often prototypes and evolutionary stuff. But we did do live in the studio one demonstration that went seriously wrong from my point of view, but turned out that actually was a real benefit to the guy who was developing it. This was a machine created for guards on railway trains who found miscreants and troublemakers who were traveling without a ticket. The process that British Rail and their staff had to go through when this happened was pretty tortuous, but the intention with the device was to be able to produce a ticket on the spot, take the money, put matters right, and have done with it, and avoid fare dodging. So we worked out how we could possibly demonstrate that this really worked in the studio by saying, well, we can't just say we're going to take a return from Newcastle to Middlesbrough, for example. We've got to show that we're doing this for real. So we put up a map of the railway network on the wall of the studio, and I threw darts at it and said, right, we shall have a senior citizen peak hour return from buying Inverness to, in went the second dart, Ochtermuchty. Meanwhile, back behind the scenes, the system was being programmed to as if I was the guard on the train. We then there was a thing like a bus conductor's ticket machine. You know, those things where the clipper used to rotate the handle and it went whoop, and out came the ticket.
Yep.
And this device produced a piece of cardboard with a brown stripe on the end, on the side of it. Now, I knew that this was what was known as a bit of magnetism. And in the studio, we had a reader to read what had been put on the mag stripe. In it went and ran it through the machine, and gobbledygook came out. Did it again, and gobbledygook came out. Now, 7 or 8 million people in those days probably watching. Young Michael Rodd was distraught, not just for his own embarrassment, but for the disappointment of the developers who had produced a machine that we'd been using all day to make sure that it went right, and for it to go wrong on the night in question. Well, as we left the studio, the disconsolate engineer said, actually, I found out what went wrong. You'd practiced so many times in the day to get it right with your dart throwing and all that nonsense, which was great fun, but you deposited part of the mag stripe on the read head on the machine, and clearly that's going to happen very quickly on a busy train when the ticket collector is handing out an awful lot of tickets. So he said, I'll put a positive twist on all this. This is an excellent piece of research that just shows we've got to go back to the drawing board and come up with something that doesn't depend on flaky mag stripes. And I think that was very good to take such a positive point of view, and the chap actually deserves a medal for not wanting to throttle me and throw his machine off the end of the pier at Tynemouth.
Fantastic. So, well, we've got so much more to talk about on technology, but I wanted to just rewind a second when you said about a live program. The BBC had lots of studios. Of course, one of the things when you were growing up in your late zeros or in your teens was of course the program that followed directly afterwards, which I presume was done in the studio next door. So when you came into work, did you have huge numbers of people queuing up, keen to see the Bay City Rollers or whoever else was on Top of the Pops that night?
It did happen from time to time. It was a feat of scheduling, wasn't it? I mean, you can imagine families sitting around saying, "What's on tonight?" And the kids would say, "Top of the Pops. We've got to watch Top of the Pops. Terrific, terrific." And father would be saying, "Well, I think you can watch Top of the Pops, providing you watch Tomorrow's World first, because Tomorrow's World is surely good for you. Top of the Pops is good fun." But you're right, there was a great benefit in that Top of the Pops inherited an audience from us that they were thankful for, and we certainly gained people who were being forced to watch the program Tomorrow's World before they'd be allowed to sit on through Top of the Pops. It was Bill Cotton, I think, who devised the schedule that made that possible, and it did mean, as you rightly point out, Paul, that we had the pleasure of occasionally sharing the coffee bar outside the studios with Pan's People and other wonderful stars of the music world. Talking about music, I am sorry that I didn't get a mention on that fantastic piece of music that you introduced the program with. I mean, I feel not being in the list, I was a bit robbed.
No, I think you were just I think this was recorded before your star was announced, Michael. That's
kept your light under a bushel. Yes, I was going to say I did feel it was a bit of a stealer's wheel.
Oh, very good. We'll get another version dubbed with your name in there, Michael. I always remember when I was young that our TV used to take so long to warm up because it was valves.
Yes.
That you had to watch a bit of Nationwide in order for Tomorrow's World to come on time, because you couldn't miss the opening credits. And then I think my father pointed out that the TV would then get into a decent stable picture after around 20 minutes, just in time for my rest of my family to watch Top of the Pops. So I do think there's something about the slow life of valve TVs and the time it takes to warm things up. Did you ever used to put things on in the program, just, kind of to bridge between Tomorrow's World and Top of the Pops? Did you ever have any things designed for teenagers or anything like that?
Ooh, I think everything we believed was designed for teenagers. Here was the future of the universe. But it does remind me that we did have a bit of music. I mean, I remember on one occasion, and I don't know whether you can find this on YouTube, but there is a young man who was able to play 3 chords on a guitar, demonstrating an early 4-track recording, multi-track portable studio by doing everything at the same time, so to speak. So this good-looking chap, and do look it out because it's quite fun, he lays down a little rhythm track, chumpity 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 chumpity, a bit like a ukulele, then adds a bit of solo work, and then plays the 2 of them back onto track 3, to which he adds something from an electronic keyboard, and on track 4 he adds some maracas and some more voice, and the whole thing came out. Now, we did that live, and actually I know, because I have seen it years ago, there is something in the archive of that left behind, and it's the sort of thing that produces a load of comments afterwards. Wasn't this fun? Great stuff, nice music. I was particularly touched by one comment I noticed very quickly that said, "Oh, it's Ed Sheeran 30 years before his time."
That's exactly what I was about to say.
Oh, so
But then
while you were
somebody else unkindly said, this guy's a bit Alan Partridge. To which I added, yeah, but I got there first.
we have found it. It is available on YouTube. So
Yes.
if people want to have a look at that when they've finished.
We'll share the link to that one as well.
But I think you do yourself a disservice, Michael, because you were the first person in the country to make a mobile phone call.
Well, I'm not sure I was the first. I was certainly the first to do it on television.
Oh, yes.
And what a moment that was. We actually succeeded in getting a wrong number. But
genius. That's tomorrow's world for you.
Well, no, you didn't see that. You didn't see that because we had to do it. We had to make that program on film, on location, because in those days, the thought of the mobile phone was kept under close control and wraps out of a building in Chelmsford. So we had to get a special license from the post office to try this test in a reasonably photogenic surrounding, close enough to the headquarters in Chelmsford to be likely to work. And what a piece of kit it was. There was a receiver, as one would expect, connected by a very curly cable to a box which had a dial on it. And as I recollect, then there was another larger box with a strap which you put round the shoulder, which was the battery that powered the whole thing. And to call it mobile was a bit like the instruction I got from the first man I worked for in the BBC who wanted me to take out a portable tape recorder to do some recording. And he said, "Michael, you've got to understand that this unit is portable in that it isn't actually bolted to the floor." A mobile phone in those days was a miracle, but of course it was thought of as a phone. And could we ever have seen all of the applications that would be made possible once the telephone system went digital and the phone, in effect, became a little computer all on its own?
Well, that's exactly it. When you think about it, some of the things you covered. So we talked about the navigation. We talked about the tickets on the trains. We talked about the cassette and being able to listen to things. And of course, you can listen to what we're doing. You could watch, if it was still on, Tomorrow's World on your phone now. And there you were showing off the very, very first prototype. Michael, stay there. We're going to do businessy bits first. So sorry, carry on.
Sorry. Can I just ask Michael a quick question, which sort of fascinates me really? So I think I do remember that. I think I remember the mobile phone one, and I certainly remember somebody on Tomorrow's World demoing a CD as well. And I think I remember something about the first streaming of movies between computers. Did you ever get a feeling when you were doing things like that that you really were doing something monumental that would change the way we live? Did you ever get that feeling with some of the technologies that this really is going to change everything?
Of course. I mean, it was a real privilege to do that. I had no real concept of the complexity of the technologies that we were doing. When the BBC gave me the job of joining Raymond and James Burke and William Woolard and Judith Hann on the programme, they were looking for a generalist, somebody who could ask the sort of idiot questions that the majority of us would ask if we didn't understand what the technology was all about, and then somehow or other explain it in a way that didn't demand a PhD in physics or atomic science. And I remember I came a bit unstuck, but it turned into a blessing in the end. One day at, I think it was Imperial College in London, a very eminent scientist said, while we were playing with a piece of kit that we were preparing to demonstrate, "Young man, can you tell me how long on your program my device is going to be given?" And I said, "Well, sir, if I'm honest with you, it will be about 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Have you the remotest idea," he said, "how many years I and my team have devoted to this?" And I said, sir, it's obviously a long time because it is a very impressive piece of equipment. But look at it this way. In the 2.5 minutes that it will be on our program, it's going to be seen by more people than it would take you the rest of your life to get round and show in person. So I'm hoping that with your help, we can make sure our demonstration is going to do it real justice. And you know, this great man effectively then sat me on his knee and took me through a crash course in what the story was all about. The technology was magnetic levitation. Now, I don't know whether magnetic levitation is remotely interesting to your audience because it's kind of got forgotten about in Britain. But we managed to demonstrate up in the research department of British Rail in Derby a longish length of track, longish about 750 yards, as I remember, where magnetic levitation really worked. Here was frictionless travel, not at a very high speed, but certainly one could see that there would be very little wear on the track or on the vehicle that was traveling along it. And this probably was going to be a major breakthrough for the transport industry. It turned up years later, I'm sure some of you will remember, as a people mover between Birmingham International Railway Station and the airport. And one of the saddest moments I remember was turning up at Birmingham International to realize that it had been replaced with a tyre, a rubber wheel-based system that ran on a similar sort of track format, but was much simpler, much more conventional, and actually much less exciting.
We're overrunning massively, and this is brilliant. But Steve Gooding, from who reached the top echelons of the Department for Transport in his career, and now is chair of Transport Technology Forum. You were nodding away on there. You can tell how interesting you are, Michael, by the number of people who are now appearing on the Zoom bit. So although we're streaming, we can see each other. Carla's appeared. We'll talk to her in a second, and Steve Gooding's appeared as well. Do you remember the magnetic railway then, Steve, when you were in the DFT?
I absolutely remember. Maglev was a big thing, and it was a great idea. And unfortunately, it's not generally that pleasant to ride upon. There's a maglev in the Far East, and the people I've spoken to who travelled on it say it's great, it's really fast. Absolutely horrible. I'd rather go more slowly and travel a different way. But isn't that the way? You know, can I just say, Michael, privileged to speak with you. Absolute fan. You know, Tomorrow's World. We need Tomorrow's World back on our televisions for the kids.
Well, Steve, you're very kind. Yes, I've written the Shanghai maglev.
That's the one.
Yeah, it is an amazing experience. I mean, yes, it does bump along a bit, but you don't realize until the little digital dial, unless it's cheating completely, of course, tells you that you're doing 430 kp, 430, I think it is, top speed, for about 8 minutes on a journey that otherwise would take a good 45. What was interesting on the day that we were able to do that, though, was the parallel track, because they have laid two, just like a real railway, an up line and a down line, so they can run a continuous service. The down line was out of action. And when I inquired, I was told that it was usually the case that only one of the lines was operating. So a miracle, but not entirely without its shortcomings.
Fantastic.
Well, I just wonder whether these fabulous ideas for travelling along in canisters in tunnels, I don't remember what we're calling them, that Elon Musk and others are telling
Hyperloop.
Hyperloop.
I did one of those in Milton Keynes, believe it or not.
Just within Milton Keynes, or Milton Keynes to somewhere else?
Well, no, well, maybe there was another one, but I'm pretty sure that demo, what a terrifying experience it was, because it was like a Lamson tube on steroids, and the development team had built a U-shaped layout, which of pipework, and a thing not unlike a torpedo. had to be laid in by the reporter, by me, and off we went to run round. I think the principle then was that it was going to be offered to mineral conveyor systems, because though it didn't run desperately fast, the thinking was that you could, as long as you kept putting stuff in at one end and taking out the other, it didn't really matter how long the journey in between the 2 points took. Are you telling me, Steve, that there was another one somewhere else?
Well, no, not at that time, but I think that, you know, subsequently the development of this idea is carrying on now, and it's just one of those things that I remember. Oh, hell, everyone on this call knows. I remember. I'm pretty sure I was promised a hover car by now. I remember watching Scott Tracy on a hover cycle on Thunderbirds. I'm just really disappointed with the automotive industry because I'm still waiting.
Well, we may well have a driverless car fairly soon, I guess.
We will come to driverless cars in a moment. I'm going to do some housekeeping very, very quickly about tomorrow's event at the TTF to give Michael a moment to catch his breath and have a sip of water. And we're going to bring back Darren Capes, and also we welcome Carla Jakeman from Innovate UK, who is far too young to unfortunately remember who you are, Michael, but don't.
Not true.
No. Showing your age, woman. You're showing your age. Right, Carla. Tomorrow you are hosting an event in the first session of the TTF conference on Thursday. So quickly tell us what you're going to be talking about.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure how I can follow that from Michael, really, other than to sort of say that we're talking about tomorrow's world when it comes to collaboration tomorrow. So we're going to be talking about, so I'm leading the innovation strand, and we're going to be talking about how collaboration and data are so important, and where we've been and where we're going when it comes to collaboration in transport innovation. So we've got some fantastic speakers lined up. So we're going to be talking to Zoe Henderson from Arup, and she's done some work for me on the benefits of collaboration between SMEs and local authorities. So it's a really good snapshot into what we've done, what progress we've made with SMEs and local authorities, and where we can still make progress. And then following on from that, James Rickaby, also from Arup, is going to be talking about technology demonstrator study that he's done for us, which is really looking more at the opportunities in future demonstrators. And again, how can local authorities and SMEs collaborate even more going forward? And then we're going to have Rob Furlong from the Knowledge Transfer Network. He's going to be doing a piece on the Innovation Nation platform, which is has been completed by an organization called 42. And this is really your typical project platform, project database, if you like, but on massive steroids. So there's so much more in that. So we're really looking forward to getting that out there. And then finally, a project of mine, which was in my portfolio for about 3 years, actually, called Loft. This is the Liverpool to Humber optimization of freight transport. And we've got Stuart Aldridge from Kraft Heinz coming to talk to us. That was a collaboration that was very complex and worked really, really well. So these are people who are normally on opposite sides of the table competing, all came together for the benefit of the sector, and it's worked really well. So we've got some presentations from those guys just mentioned, and then we're going to do some Q&A. So we're hoping that people will come with some really good questions to challenge them and ask them, you know, some interesting thoughts, pick it apart a little bit, and just to see how it goes tomorrow. So looking forward to having a positive innovation session on how we will move things forward when it comes to transport innovations to take things a little bit further on into tomorrow's world. I tried to make a link there.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed, Carla. We'll remind you just to say 10:30 till 11:45 with Carla Jakeman tomorrow morning on the TTF conference. In the afternoon, we'll be making better use of data in association with London councils in a session called Driving with Our Eyes Closed. That's between 1:45 and 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, the second part of tomorrow's Transport Technology Forum conference. Now, I'm going to bring live voiceover man in because we're throwing the format of the program away. So, live voiceover man, could you please read what's on your screen?
Certainly. Welcome along to TTFM. You're listening to our live stream, and thank you for joining us tonight. We had great plans and a full schedule tonight, but ladies and gentlemen, Michael Rodd is far too interesting for us to do all that other stuff tonight, so we'll bring you all of that tomorrow.
And we're going to keep Michael Rodd with us today, and we'll pick up on a couple of questions that are coming in. Also, again, in a great Tomorrow's World moment of Michael saying things are going wrong, we were supposed to have as many people as you need on the chat, and the chat appears to be playing up at the moment as well. So I apologize for that, because we're struggling to get your comments through, and I know we're getting some feedback back on that one. But look, we'll carry on regardless with Michael Rodd. And Michael, let me just remind you of another of your great Tomorrow's World moments.
I've always had a sneaking desire to have a car with a chauffeur, but never did I believe that I'd end up with a car with no driver at all.
This apparatus is capable of detecting electromagnetic fields. And here, in the area between the paving stones, it's picking up a complex pattern of signals. It's those signals which are the signals of the driverless car.
For years now, the possibilities of driverless motor cars progressing down accident-free highways has been discussed and dreamed about. Indeed, some research organisations are now carrying out work on automatic guidance systems for buses. But it is perhaps ironic that Europe's first application of the driverless motor car is not part of an attempt to produce a new vehicle, simply to speed up the testing of the old sort. But as we know only too well on Tomorrow's World, the greatest inventions sometimes have the strangest beginnings.
Brilliant. I'll share that with you. And just to time date that, there's a screenshot, all in French, but my French is good enough to read a date, that took place. You did that filming, Michael, the day before Charles and Diana got married. So that timestamps just how long ago that one was. And as you alluded to at the end, that was actually so that they could test cars without vibrating the life out of the driver, that you had a driverless vehicle driving around a test track on a very bumpy test track to see how the car reacted.
That's absolutely right. Yes, I was just thinking as I heard that, because I haven't heard that for years, Paul. That must have been 81?
It would have been the 28th, or was I think the 28th of July, Tuesday, 28th of July, 1981. Bright sunshine somewhere in France.
Such precision, such precision. Yes, it's obviously a technology that has seen the light of the day in automated factories and warehouses. And I remember even at Newark Airport outside of New York, there was a robot who would take you to where you wanted to go if you asked him and he knew the way, and I believe if there was a wire in the floor that led you there.
It's just fascinating to see. And one thing that wasn't obviously you couldn't spot on radio, but when we share the link tomorrow, you'll get to see it. When you were saying about the magnetic strip in the road, you could see the car coming up behind you, and you jumped out of the way a second or two before it would have run you over. How did you time that?
That was very silly. Alpha male bravado, and I deserved not to get away with it. No, totally irresponsible. And in the television industry's great defense, no director would allow that sort of thing these days. Absolutely outrageous behavior. But it was an amazing day. I mean, the thing that I remember was that this was a car absolutely crammed with large computer type cabinets. Every spare space in, I think it was a Peugeot 404, I think, was full of kit. Now, some of it, of course, would be the test analysis systems that the manufacturers wanted to record and examine. But an awful lot of it must have been the technology that kept the thing on the road. And in those 40 years since then, just imagine the miniaturization that has become possible and how little we knew about the wonderful, tiny, powerful units that would be available to us all to do exciting things with in these days.
Brilliant. Now, I just want to move on. There are so many things I want to talk about, and we're never going to finish at 8 o'clock, but never mind. Want to ask a couple of things that have been and gone. So you talked about things in tomorrow's world, but there were two key things that, one, you mentioned Raymond Baxter, very famous piece of television, and the other was you yourself. And we're talking obviously about Concorde. She flies, and the shuttle. What do you remember about your coverage of those two, momentous feats of flight?
Well, it kind of changed my life a bit, actually. Tomorrow's World, I was brave in my book at a time when the world, or at least most of us in Britain, were awaiting the appearance of this amazing piece of technology that would carry 120 passengers given a fair wind at twice the speed of sound. I probably got my statistics wrong there. Just anyway, far faster than anything had ever been before. And we were really excited. But it was clear that Concorde was not having an easy time selling itself to the rest of the world. And it wasn't just that it hadn't been invented in America or it didn't have sufficient German technology in it. It was because there were limitations to what it could do. What it did do, it did pretty miraculously, and everybody was enthused by the potential of this amazing piece of equipment. But there were alternative approaches. So we took the decision that we would look at how Boeing in particular and Airbus, who incidentally, of course, were also involved through Aerospatiale in the development of Concorde, were preparing alternative approaches to mass transportation that could perhaps operate more efficiently, and though they may not go as fast as Concorde, they could get more of us around to where we wanted to go and we were anxious to see than Concorde ever could. And the show changed the program. Tomorrow's World became a different program after that because Raymond didn't like what we had done. And sadly, he very shortly afterwards resigned from the team and left us to get on with it because he felt that the program was there to promote British technology and not to examine the shortcomings of British technology. Whereas a number of us on the program realized that technology on its own only succeeded if it actually delivered what people could make use of. And it was very sad when all that came to nothing, but it did make me realize that possibly Tomorrow's World had become part of a problem that we thought we were overcoming. We believed on the program that we were encouraging young people particularly to take an interest in engineering and in science and in manufacture and creating wealth and employment to enhance the well-being of the company, of the country. It did appear that Tomorrow's World had actually become a bit of a barrier to that progress because developers began to think that getting their thing onto Tomorrow's World was almost the end of the game. But after that, the job had been successful, they had moved on and they were doing something else. In other words, it was not encouraging people to actually go through the whole process of market analysis, of working out whether something was interesting technically, certainly, but also was meeting a need that was sellable to the rest of the world.
You're talking, Michael, just to say, to two people who I've heard speak exactly the same way. Two people who I can see on screen at the moment, namely Steve and Andy, about the development of driverless cars. I'm not sure which one of you wants to pick up on that first. Andy?
Well, I was just saying, I wanted to almost play back what you just said to everyone who I know who develops a new piece of kit, and I say, well, what's the business case for this? What are the benefits? Why would people buy it, particularly if they're a local authority that doesn't have much resources, particularly if they're a driver of an older car, hasn't got much money. And you know, the example of Concorde is magnificent. The engineering there is magnificent. I don't know if you ever got a chance to fly in it, Michael.
No, sadly not. One of the great regrets of my life. And I have to say, having said all I have said, I was on the hilltop just to the south of Heathrow when Concorde made its last flight, and I was one of the many people there with tears in my eyes. This was the end of an era, and a very sad occasion.
Well, you and I live not very far from a Concorde at Brooklands, so I think when we're allowed out, I shall buy you a cream tea on Brooklands, and I shall invite my friend Mr. Gooding to come along. So, Steve, I'm sure you've got some questions.
Well, Andy, you and I visited that Concorde on Brooklands not that long ago and reflected on what the exhibition there was saying, what the future might be. I wasn't actually going to say something about the driverless revolution, if it is going to come or if it isn't. What I'd actually be interested in asking Michael about is this. The thing about Tomorrow's World and about the way it presented its stories, for me, was it managed to make them exciting but not frightening. And I think some of the technological developments, some of the way the world might develop, they are shocking. They are, in their way, they're disruptive. The idea that cars might drive themselves is hugely disruptive. The idea that the cars might not need fossil fuels, which we're in the midst of right now, is hugely disruptive. And I think there's a knack there, which I'd be interested to hear your chop on, Michael, of how far Tomorrow's World was presenting a future in a positive way, but not a frightening way.
Well, in many ways, Steve, I think that was the problem that Raymond identified in his experience of being part of the program we did about Concorde. He never accused those of us who looked at the Airbus story and the Boeing story and how bigger, slower, but more efficient was probably the better way forward. But Concorde was an opportunity, an aspiration. I think all of us wanted to fly in Concorde, but knew that the chances of our ever being able to do that were very slim. So when push comes to shove, I think we took the right approach in questioning whether there was, as Andy calls it, a real business case, or whether the project wasn't just something that engineers who worked on it would be incredibly proud of. I mean, you were talking a little bit earlier, and Carla mentioned it. It is human nature to establish silos of interest, particular things that you love and do well, or have to do because that's how you earn a living. And the thought of moving on and actually collaborating with what somebody might see as the opposition is a serious constraint in almost everything we do. I'm recently reading George Dyson's book about Alan Turing and all of those who helped to develop the amazing machines that we're now dependent upon. And it is an interesting story in which the mathematicians didn't agree with the engineers didn't like the logisticians, and various departments that actually finally came together. Took years to do that because vested interests and particular prejudices we're locked in to the way our minds work. And I do think in almost all areas of life, that is a major issue that if we're really going to move forward, we've got to take more seriously.
Talking of the business cases. Oh, sorry, carry on, Steve. I'll let you hop in before I then move on.
I just want to hop in on that because I couldn't agree more. And what I think we could really do with, but I don't know what the vehicle would be in the modern world, whether it's a TV program or a streamed program or whatever, would be it would be the vehicle which challenged us to say it doesn't have to be like it was. And two instances I would put on the table for our audience this evening are, I've been involved in conversations recently about how are we going to bring mass transit world back after the coronavirus? How are we going to bring the buses back? And the question I really want to ask is, why do you want to bring the buses back? Do you want to bring buses as I thought of them 24, 36 months ago back? I grew up in the world of the Route Master, right? I remember very, very great fondness, the Route Master bus. But I just wonder whether the double-decker, whether the bus as we think of it, is the vehicle we should be thinking of now. Where do we go to get people to be inspired to think, actually, 5 to 10 years out, we might need something quite different. In fact, there might be something quite different on the stocks that we could work with. And there are a whole bunch of vested interests, clearly, who have spent a lot of money on the sort of things we've got now, but need to be encouraged to think maybe that's not the next thing. And I'll just add, I remember the chief scientific advisor in the Department for Transport, Professor Frank Kelly, strolled into my office one day. It must have been about 2013, 2014, and said to me, "You do realize that the future of music," I had an iPod, "the future of music is streaming. No one's going to have these things anymore." And I said, "That's fascinating, Frank. Very, very interesting, I'm sure." And dismissed it like you do. And of course, what have my kids got? They stream everything. I'm the only person in the household with CDs. I really wish we had something that was helping everyone think beyond where we are today, which is what I think Tomorrow's World did.
Well, that's kind of you to say so, Steve, but I won't give up my CDs. It's a bit like the driverless car. I think people actually quite enjoy driving their cars. And I think that will be a major problem to overcome if the only sort of car you can get drives itself. We're all as bad as one another. Do you still use your iPod?
Oh, I still use my iPod. I've got a car that's got a CD player in it. And I happen to know that Andy Graham there has a vast selection of vinyl records dating back to the 1940s. So we've all got those things. Yes. But if I think ahead, I don't think the future of bus services looks like a 70-seater diesel vehicle. And that's the challenge I want to put into the system, that I think I'll be sitting, if I'm using a bus in 5 to 10 years' time, it won't look and feel like the one I've got now, but I might well have my iPod on.
What do you make of the device I've never had the pleasure of using, that sort of pod device that connects the car park at Terminal 5 with the airport? I mean, if we don't have driverless cars, could we have driverless taxis that you could pick up and follow this sort of principle?
I think it's extremely likely that in tightly defined circumstances, like within an airport, that we'll be getting into vehicles that aren't just following a predetermined course, but are in some sense determining when they start, stop, how fast they go. I also think that it's entirely plausible that we will, certainly within my lifetime, be able to get onto a motorway in a motor vehicle that we were driving, press a button and have the vehicle take over from us. And I think if anyone listening to this has been in a Tesla, you know that we're quite close to that already. So What I don't think is that we're going to be able to have a vehicle that sits on our front drive and we can get in and say, take me to wherever that might be, whatever the road type, whatever the traffic type, the vehicle will cope with everything.
Yeah.
So I'm actually, I'll come back to your point, Michael. I think that there are certain circumstances and certain use cases where the autonomy will work. One of the companies that certainly we've been in touch with, Oxbotica, has been working far more on things like construction sites and mining, and not driving around cars on roads, but other circumstances in which motor vehicles are performing really useful and important tasks, have very high degrees of automation. Just think of a combine harvester that doesn't need a driver. The most boring job in the world is to sit in the combine harvester and go up and down and up and down. So that's not needed anymore. That's a good thing.
The Wurzels would be out of a job, though.
I think it's a very good point. That I think if you want to buy the most high-tech vehicle you can buy to drive on the public highway, you want to go and buy a tractor.
Yep.
You want to go buy a vehicle made by John Deere, because the technology, again, because they work in a confined area when they're in a field, and they have immense.
And it all comes back to the business case.
But the key thing is,
it's worth it.
It is about solving a problem, and you could argue with smart motorways, they've solved a problem that doesn't exist of all lane running at 3 o'clock in the morning when you don't need all lane running because there's no traffic. But we won't veer off onto that. But I want to pick up on the risk side of things, Michael, because I seem to remember, and I don't think it lasted very long. Didn't you do a program about business cases and risk and technology and so forth in the late 70s?
Yes, it became a spin-off of the Tomorrow's World team, largely on the basis of the experience we had with Concorde. Yes, we followed developments and ideas through, like the Dunlop Run Flat tire, De Novo, I think it was called. And I suppose one would say there is a variant of that in the back of my old Volvo these days. It doesn't run flat, but it's certainly not a spare wheel as I would know it. Yes, we investigated how difficult it would be to follow Star Wars. The first Star Wars, we got an invitation to consider the film industry and how you follow up on a big hit. But going back to the point that I think Andy made, that there has to be an opportunity for a business case, and then Steve went on to say, if the business case can be made in a constrained area and kept under control, things stand a much better chance of being taken seriously. Very silly story, but for about 15 years, my wife ran a Mini Clubman that never changed its oil. We did a story on Tomorrow's World about a device that became known in the trade, I gather, as the toilet roll in the sock. It was an extra oil filter that you could fit to an internal combustion engine. And when the oil needed to be changed, you didn't change the oil, you changed the filter. Now, the real objective of that was to fit out Caterpillar tractors and bulldozers and heavy plant so that the vast amounts of oil that they would go through running hours and hours and hours a day continuously could be saved. But the idea failed because the demonstration on a small family car was just too ludicrous for anybody to take very seriously. But I have to say, it worked perfectly. We never changed the oil on that much-loved Mini Clubman, and we must have had it 12 years. It certainly did 75,000 miles without an oil change. Now, in those days, that was a bit of a miracle.
Fantastic. Right, I'm just going to rewind a second, Michael, because we've kept you beyond the hour we asked, but we'll finish at 8:15. But you mentioned the film industry and you mentioned Star Wars, and that was a perfect segue into hang on, I've muted it. How dare I? Who remembers this after school? Oh, it makes the hairs stand up on the back of your neck, doesn't it? Listen to that. So, if you're not old enough to remember, it's just in the last sort of corners of your mind. That's the Screen Test theme tune. So, how on earth did a man who, I think I'm right in saying, got his big break covering the tragic death of Donald Campbell, end up doing both Screen Test, a kids' TV quiz show, and Tomorrow's World at the same time?
Well, you may well ask. I was in the right place at the right time, and as I've said before, was incredibly lucky. Maybe my secret is I'm not disinterested in anything. I'm intrigued by lots of things and never give up wanting to learn more, which is why I'm struggling with the book about Alan Turing, because there is a great story there that I've never come to terms with. You don't give up. And the BBC had a studio in Manchester and had an opportunity to do something for, and they knew that there was a need in London for a children's program. And there was a film editor who realized that the cinema was actually suffering because television was taking people away from picture houses. And one of my interests has always been films and photography and the technique of making moving pictures work on the screen. So he and I talked, and we devised a game which we borrowed from the Boy Scouts, and probably from the Girl Guides too. I think Baden-Powell called it Kim's Game. It turned up much later on the Generation Game. You were shown a large number of objects. The objects were removed, and you then had to remember what you had seen. And we used bits of film. So Screen Test became an opportunity to show young people the delights of good cinematography, play a game with how much they could remember in each of the little clips that they saw, and have a bit of fun and games. And I was doing that for 2 years when the opportunity came as a generalist to join the Tomorrow's World team. And the Tomorrow's World team said, you're going to have to give up messing around with kids, of course. And I said, well, I don't want to do that. Why didn't we just give it 6 months and see what happens? So obviously they were keen to keep me interested. So we did that. And at the end of 6 months, the legendary Bill Cotton, controller of BBC One, was able to report that the audience for Tomorrow's World had gone up in the sort of segment that was of young people who were changing from their primary into their secondary schools. And the audience for Screen Test had not suffered one little bit. So I found myself riding 2 privileged bicycles for a good many years. And great fun it was too. And we've still got the cinema with us, so television didn't win out entirely in the end.
Fantastic. And I think I'm pretty certain that I saw the vast majority of the Jungle Book just in little clips on the Screen Test rather than ever actually seeing it in the cinema. Right.
Come on, Paul. What you saw was clips of the double deckers.
And and also Children's Film Foundation was always on there. I had no idea what the Children's Film Foundation were, but they were always on Screen Test. And as I mentioned when I chatted to Michael ahead of this, he would never get away with it now because he used to show little clips of Laurel and Hardy and refer to them as the fat one and the thin one. And I'm sure that would never happen on kids' TV now. So Michael, right, let's get down to business now. There you were all over kids' TV. You were on Tomorrow's World. You'd done that program about risk and so forth. Then you appeared on TVS. You did a 3D television demo on ITV that we would love to talk about, but we haven't got time. And then suddenly you just disappeared off the screen. And the next we heard of you was when Andy and I were standing on the press balcony at the Farnborough Air Show in 2016, sidled over and said, there's a bloke called Michael Rodd here. Would you like to interview him? What happened in the intervening 35 years?
it's all part of the same story, inevitably, from my point of view. Having decided that it was essential for engineering and business to have a case, a marketing plan, a scheme that would work well, I realized that having got it slightly wrong in romanticizing perhaps the technology in the way that Tomorrow's World did, there was room for an organization of program makers who would work with business and industry and charities and public bodies to help improve and benefit everybody who was part of the world which they inhabited. And it was funny that not funny, it was absolutely fortuitous that you were mentioning silos and breaking down and collaboration and a way to make to make different people realize that they have a contribution to make, and it may be to a much wider group than the one that they are currently involved with. And we took on all sorts of projects, but the one in this context that sticks in my mind was the project to create a series of events and programs simply to be used by a major oil company to demonstrate in as many ways as they can that the competition was not a competitive oil company. Sorry, I've got that wrong now. You see, it happens when you get to my age. That the competition was not the guys on another oil platform of the same company, but was actually part and parcel of the competitor in the marketplace. We did a major motor manufacturer used us to do the same thing, to overcome the question. Well, the shop floor said, well, I knew that wasn't going to work, but they never asked me. And we made a whole series of little programs along the lines of things that had gone wrong that could have been avoided if silos had been broken down and more people had talked with one another. It's great fun. I mean, the team still exists. I'm not part of it anymore, but I'm very proud of the work that we've done in the background to help move the whole process of doing things better and more sensibly and more satisfying for everybody involved in the world of business.
Well, Michael, I was taught at journalism college back in the 90s by a great guy called Bob Atkins that when you're presenting a program and something is really good, throw everything else out and just stick to the good bits, which is why we have A, overrun by nearly 20 minutes, and B, not used any of the other material we've been prepared for, because we could have talked for so much longer. I've got so many more notes I'd love to talk to you about, but thank you ever so much for joining us. And do you know what? You must have told some of those stories 1,000 times, yet you still make them sound like it's the first time you've ever told that particular story. So that was absolutely fantastic. And when we actually get to meet in 3 dimensions, we would love to have you as a guest of honor at a future Transport Technology Forum or ITS UK, or one of the things where our industry gets together, because I think some of the stories you've told have been amazing. And certainly people of our age and my age and older, I think, owe a lot to what you and the Tomorrow's World team did to inspire them into engineering. And there is a whole generation of engineers who've been inspired by some of the stuff you did. So thank you very much. And I'm sure Andy would like to just chip in and say something himself before we go.
Well, I was just going to say the same. I was holding up my hand as Thursday night. I used to watch Top of the Pops. I used to watch Tomorrow's World. My father was an engineer. I'm an engineer. My daughter's an engineer. I think there's something about the DNA, but I think there's very, very much about the way that you and your team presented it. And I'm so pleased to hear that you continued that in the back room. And I think from our TTF, there's so many lessons that we've could pick up from you, and particularly in terms of our conference over the next few days. That message from you about breaking down silos, I think is very, very strong. So just to say thank you so much for your time. Thank you to everyone who's listened. Thank you to Paul for putting all this together with his team. Voiceover man and Luke have done a superb job. We've got a whole load of Transport Does talent, singers. We've got a whole load of jokes to tell you, but that's tomorrow night.
We'll do that tomorrow night, and Michael, Andy, and I will chuck a couple of £100 at Cancer Research UK as a thank you for your time tonight. So we really appreciate your time, and it is all I can do now to thank you for listening. Thank Michael Rodd for being our brilliant special guest on this first ever TTFM, and somehow we threw it together and it was brilliant. And thank you very much for everyone for being part of it. And it's left to voiceover man to close out the program.
I still want my hoverboard and my jetpack, and I'm convinced the only reason I'm not going to get it is because I can't watch Michael Rodd on a Thursday night at 7 o'clock. Many thanks to Michael Rodd and to the entire team. TTFM will return tomorrow at 7 o'clock with special guests Steve Norris and Stephen Ladyman. Do join us and listen to us again via this stream. TTFM was presented by Paul Hutton and Andy Graham for the Transport Technology Forum.